Hey guys, I am back with part 2, and we'll have part 3 later in the day. Of course, in ZDT's bizarre attempt to get a restraining order against Solomon. Of course, as you know, Solomon previously got a restraining order against ZDT. There are no further appeals that can be granted, no further continuances. So this is sort of ZDT's last gasp, if you will. So what happened? Finally, everything got started. Tamer was at least able to gather the corresponding evidence and was able to be somewhat effective in that as they resumed in court. And here's the main argument. The argument that Stephen Tamer on behalf of ZDT is giving is that ZDT has been called a pedophile. And the flyers noting ZDT as a pedophile, the flyers that Streets handed out, Solomon is somehow responsible for the flyers, and thus this is defamation. There was a lot of back and forth on that, and I will say Solomon didn't do the best because when Solomon is on the stand, Tamer kept questioning Solomon and said, "Did you ever call Zero Dark Tony a pedophile?" And Solomon, instead of just answering the question, said, "I can't recall." And Tamer was effective in getting Solomon to slip up because Tamer said, "So did you call ZDT a pedophile 200 times? He said, "No." And then Tamer said, "Did you call ZDT a pedophile 100 times? "No, not 100 times. And the judge was able to interject and was kind of forced Solomon to say, "Well, you're saying you don't recall, but by this line of questioning, by the amount of times that you've confirmed you have not called him a pedophile, by inference, you are conferring that at least at some point you called him a pedophile." And Solomon did had to admit that, which didn't look good. And the judge was initially I could see the judge, who was exacerbated mostly by Tamer, to be a little more sympathetic towards ZDT when his kind of feeling is, well, was there this concerted effort to call ZDT a pedophile? And this is what I was saying in the chat, guys. This is why I even called ZDT that term specifically, because I see no tangible evidence. I see tangible evidence that he's abusive. I see tangible evidence that he deserves a restraining order. I see evidence that he has gotten people to be separated from their families or attempted to do that, and in the case of Nora, gotten people to lose their employment. I've seen evidence that he has detailed completely inappropriate, long, detailed sexual encounters with children. But in a court of law, there is no evidence that he is actually a pedophile, because he said he's had a dream, but he never said, "I want to do this," nor has he contacted anybody under the age of 18 and said, "Hey, do you want to hang out? Do you want to meet up?" Or was he getting flirty with somebody under the age of 18? The answer is no. So perhaps going forward, when people really try to put ZDT to shame, and they should, if they're doing an external thing, perhaps saying stuff in the chat is okay, but if they're doing an external thing, be careful of how you label somebody, because this is the crux of what Tamer is trying to win the case with. Essentially, he's saying there's been no evidence that ZDT is an actual pedophile, no criminal history of that, and the projection that Tamer has tried to say is out of nowhere, Solomon has called him a pedophile, but what was weird is they got Solomon admit it, but there's no Solomon calling ZDT a pedophile on video. Another piece of evidence that Tamer used is there is this moment where Solomon saw ZDT at a crosswalk, sort of came over to him apparently, and called him a douchebag, and not called him a pedophile, but called him a douchebag and other insulting things, which I don't think held that much water, but that was another facet that they were trying to use, that the defense was trying to use. And then the biggest part is DOA went to the police station. Solomon was there. Solomon again tripped up a little bit and said he was just kind of there coincidentally. You really know he's there with DOA. So a little bit of tripping up, to be quite frank. I'm gonna be honest and tell you when things are ridiculous on ZDT's side, and be honest and talk about when they might have something that might convince a judge. Not something that might convince you or me, we all know the sides that we're on, but something that might convince the judge when you're analyzing things honestly, looking at how you can be effective in a court of law, what might help you win, what might help you lose. So the external, it was cute, it was funny doing the flyers, but it's not helping in court. What Streets did simply is probably the biggest negative that Solomon has. Having said all of that, I gave you the worst for first, save the best for last. The judge seemed sympathetic. He kept questioning. He wanted to make sure that he knew that Solomon called him a pedophile. And I'll read the exact transcripts as well. Oh, and guys, by the way, if you want to donate, please do. Some people have been donating via Super Chat, which is very nice. But I'm not able to use that cash for an entire month. So if you want to help for motels and other things, please donate the link that I have via GoFundMe or Cash App or Venmo, because I can access those a lot more frequently. But thank you, whether it be Kirby's mom or other people who have donated anyway. But here's the point to remark upon, though. The judge appeared sympathetic towards ZDT until he found out for the first time that there's already a restraining order against ZDT on behalf of Solomon. That changed the entire dynamic. And essentially what happened after the judge learned this. And remember, Solomon's attorney, who seems to care about him a lot, has been very effective. His name is David Marco Weber. He's been in family law for over a decade. He hasn't gone on the stand yet, so I am positive that he is going to bring this up in part 2. But the good news is it has already been brought up. And the hilarious part is it was already brought up because Tamer had the video clip of Solomon calling ZDT a douchebag to help them out, but in that same clip, Solomon remarks that he has a restraining order against ZDT. So, Tamer issuing that video clip of Solomon calling ZDT a douchebag hurt his case, because there, for the first time in the courtroom with this new judge, it's not Ochoa, it's a different judge who seems exacerbated but wants to kind of figure everything out. It revealed to the judge, which the judge did not know before, that there was a restraining order against Solomon. All of a sudden, the judge was very, very interested in why this restraining order was issued. So he asked Solomon a few questions, and again, I'm going to go back and read from the text, but essentially, did he say anything that makes him seem like a pedophile? And then Solomon did say, well, he's detailed in his dreams about sexual liaisons with me, and I'm a minor, etc., etc. So that was pretty effective. And the judge says, well, the judge said, I need to look at this RO. This RO is the reason he got this RO, the reason it was granted. The court granted the RO. This entire case essentially depends on the specifics of what the court ruled in this RO. Because if that's the case, then it wasn't Solomon who started it. If Solomon called him a pedophile or did anything, it wasn't really him who started it. The court has already sanctioned ZDT for these awful words, these awful actions. So the judge is very, very keen on that, and the judge wanted to try to figure out, was ZDT actually being a pedophile? And again, maybe not exactly, but close enough to it. So the video. Now I'm going to talk about the text. The video showed the judge, and remember, for names, I'm using ZDT, DOA, instead of Hocksetter, Mr. Sassoon, Mr. D'Amato, just because it was easier to get in shorthand. So if you try not to pick apart for that, but that's the explanation. The judge says, so the video showed of Solomon calling ZDT a douchebag. The judge says, well, why is this relevant? You're saying that this video shows Solomon harassing Zero Dark Tony. And Mr. Tamer says, yes, Solomon walks into the crosswalk where my client is, and he walks against the traffic. The judge says, so that's harassing? Tamer says, yes. Tamer then questions Solomon on the stand. Tamer says, Solomon, so DOA, did he ever go to the police on your behalf? Solomon says, no. Tamer then says, were you on the phone with DOA when he was at the police station talking about your case? So the judge, that Tamer's going to try to get him with this. Solomon says, I don't recall. Judge says, I'm confused. How does a call to the police show that Solomon was harassing ZDT? So already, just a little aside, already the judge is throwing this out, saying, essentially, why is this relevant? Why is a police call that somebody else made relevant to saying that ZDT deserves a restraining order against Solomon? Doesn't really make much sense if you analyze it. Tamer says he lied to the police. The judge says, so this is a random person on the phone. I don't know who Mr. Hocksetter is. None of this seems relevant. Tamer says, DOA, Mr. Hocksetter, is saying to the police that my client is a pedophile. They're all filming this for their YouTube. Judge says, so if you're saying Solomon told DOA to say these things to the police, But yet there's no voice recording showing Solomon saying these things. I'm just supposed to believe that Solomon is responsible for DOA's actions? I see no evidence to confirm this. This is all the judge talking. I hear nothing from Solomon himself. This isn't relevant. Tamer says, well, we also have the flyers that Solomon is responsible for. Judge says, none of this is helpful. Somebody else put these posters up. And the judge then goes on to say, I'm at a loss. In this case, I have a person, not this person, doing harassment. And you say Solomon is directing them. But there's no recording of him directing anything. Tamer says, Tamer then gets Solomon back on the stand. Tamer still with Solomon on the stand. This is a big judge aside that Tamer had with Solomon while he's on the stand. Tamer then asks Solomon, how many times have you called my client a pedophile? Solomon says, I don't know. Judge says to Solomon, you acknowledge calling him a pedophile, yes? So he wanted to get that locked down. You know, again, helpful for Tamer and ZDT. Solomon says, yes, he talked about me sexually and my mother. And the judge says, where were you when the statements were made? Was it in person? So meaning the judge is trying to figure out, well, did ZDT, with these sexual descriptions of Solomon and his mother, did he say it directly to their face? Did he say it as a threat? And the judge is trying to wrap his head around this whole weird YouTube internet thing. And Solomon said, no. This is done via YouTube. And the judge says, and the judge trying to give Solomon a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. He says, do you know what that word means? The judge asked Solomon. Solomon says, yes. I believe it's somebody who's been sexually violent towards people, which is not really what it means. And judge says, do you believe that ZDT made statements aligning with pedophilia while addressing you? Solomon says, yes. And the judge says, well, what did you observe that was specifically directed towards you? Solomon said, saying that he will rape me. And Solomon said, great, because he's using the internet lingo. Solomon not that it matters. Solomon had to explain that grape is an expression for rape because he can't say rape. He kind of awkwardly explained that. The judge is like, why do you keep saying grape? Guys, by the way, if you want to use a real word, people are so upset about using the real word. I think you could just use the real word. What did you observe directed towards? We talked about that. And the judge says, so when did he say that? And Solomon said, in May. And the judge says, so you saw something on YouTube. What did you observe him talking about? You have video of ZDT saying that? And the Tamer cuts in. He says, yes, but I asked before if you believe... Tamer's now on the stand with Solomon. Still in the stand. But I asked before if you believe my client was a pedophile. Solomon says, yes. So Tamer says, were you at a carnival... This is at Venice Beach Boardwalk, where you were showing the flyers. So this is a flyer incident. And isn't it true that you were helping out pass these flyers? Solomon says yes. And Tamer says, and there was a QR code, and if you open to this QR code, it would say, the QR code with ZDT's picture, that he is a pedophile. And Solomon says, I guess. I don't know what happens once you actually open it. Smart thing to say. Tamer says, did you tell anyone at the fair, at the Venice Beach Boardwalk, they use fair, but it's Venice Beach, that the client is a pedophile? Solomon says, I don't recall. Probably the smartest time he could have said, I don't recall. The judge says, you called the petitioner and said he's a pedophile. When was the first time you told people? He said, at that pier. I probably told 2 people. And remember, Solomon never calls ZDT a pedophile. He doesn't call him a child predator, though. So they show the clip of the video, and Solomon, but there's a difference. Solomon says, this guy's a child predator, actively stalking me. He's 54 years old. He's obsessed with a 17-year-old. We're warning the community, scan the QR code. You can see, and he has a restraining order. So there's that video, again, the video that Tamer uses to sink his own case, where Solomon mentions his restraining order. The judge says, so you're saying in the video, remember the judge is not Alcoa, a different judge. So you're saying in the video that he's stalking you and you have a restraining order. What for? Solomon says for sexual comments. Whoops. The judge does say, the judge says now, calling somebody a pedophile is very damaging, but I need to see the restraining order as it might be true. In the other restraining order, the court found facts to be true. When the court issues a restraining order, it determines that the facts are true. Now, Tamer tries to claim that because ZDT didn't show up, the restraining order is not valid. Tamer says it was a default judgment. Default judgment being saying, well, my client didn't show up, he didn't answer to it, therefore it was an automatic loss, therefore my client is innocent. And the judge slaps that argument. He says that doesn't matter, even if the other party doesn't show up. So what? Mr. D'Amato did not appear for the last RO, and therefore the RO is valid? That doesn't make any sense, the judge is saying. The judge continues, if the court previously found your client acting in a sexual manner, what case law says that I cannot treat the previous restraining order as being factual? What part of case law? It changes the outcome of the attempted to harass. Now, Tamer couldn't talk about the case law. Credit to the attorney for Joey versus Streets, the bald guy. He was impressive because he knew case law like the back of his head. This is why you could see that ZDT is dealing with such an incompetent attorney, and, bat signal to Nora, Vanessa LaRose, and Mindy. If he's going to be using the schmuck the entire time, he doesn't even know case law. This is probably going to be a slam dunk. And Tamer said, but in that restraining order, there's no finding saying that Zero Dark Tony was a pedophile. The judge says, but if a child says someone said something sexual, then the child was being harassed. And the court granted that restraining order, viewing the child's words to be true. There's a restraining order for Mr. D'Amato that says he's guilty of that conduct. And the judge says, all right, we'll resume at 1:30. I need to know the context I'm dealing with. Find me some case law that says the other RO is irrelevant. And we got a whole part 2, and that's just day 1. Again, if you want to donate, I got my links, and I will see you probably in about 3 or 4 hours for part 2. We're about to go back to court in about 10 minutes. Bye-bye, guys.